My daughter sat me at the server's table at her own wedding, introducing me to her new in-laws as a hired handyman, so she wouldn't have to explain my calloused hands to her high society friends. She stood there in her designer gown, laughing with people who looked at me like I was something they stepped in on the sidewalk. She didn't know that while she was playing pretend, I was holding the deed to the very world she was trying so hard to join. I've spent 40 years as a plumber and heavy machinery mechanic. My hands are permanently stained with oil and grease, and my knuckles are scarred from decades of honest work. To Samantha, those hands were an embarrassment. To me, they were the tools that paid for her private schools, her European vacations, and that six-figure wedding she didn't contribute a single cent toward.
I sat there in the back of the hall, smelling of cheap soap and old leather, watching my only child toast to a family that would discard her the moment they found out her father was the man who fixes their toilets. Before we get deeper into how I dismantled their arrogant world, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I share stories like this every week that you won't want to miss. Now, back to that night at the wedding. The Pullers, her new in-laws, are the kind of people who think money makes them royalty. They own an investment firm and spend their lives talking about quote one while looking down on anyone who actually builds things. During the reception, Samantha's mother-in-law, Eleanor, walked past my table. She didn't even look at me. She just snapped her fingers and pointed at an empty wine glass, expecting me to clear it. Samantha saw it happen. She locked eyes with me for a second, and instead of defending her father, she looked away and giggled at something her husband said. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. I realized I wasn't her father anymore. I was just a ghost from a life she wanted to bury. The Puller family lived in a world of glass towers and cold stairs. My son-in-law, Julian, was the golden boy of this dynasty. He talked a lot about quote 2 and quote 3, but I knew the truth. I had spent my life fixing the machines that actually make the world run. And I can tell when a motor is burning out long before the smoke starts pouring out of the hood. Their family business, Puller Investments, was that smoking motor. They lived in a massive estate with marble floors, but the foundation was crumbling. Samantha changed the moment she moved into their mansion. She started speaking with a forced, posh accent and wearing clothes that cost more than my first shop. But it wasn't just the clothes. It was the way she looked at me when I visited. She'd make me enter through the back door and leave my boots on the porch, even if it was raining. She told her new friends I was a distant relative who did property maintenance. She was terrified that Eleanor, the matriarch of the family, would find out that Samantha's college tuition was paid for by a man who spent his days elbow-deep in grease and sewage. Eleanor Puller was the worst of them. She treated everyone beneath her tax bracket like furniture. I remember a dinner where I had to drop off some paperwork Samantha had forgotten. Eleanor looked at my old Ford F-150 in her driveway like it was a pile of trash. She told Samantha, right in front of me, "Dear, tell the help to park on the street next time. The oil leaks are ruining the cobblestone." Samantha didn't even flinch. She just nodded and whispered to me to leave quickly. They thought they were a different species, superior and untouchable. They had no idea that while they were sipping champagne, I was quietly buying up the debt their failing firm was hemorrhaging. I was the one who owned the ground they walked on, and I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the rug. The world thinks a man in a grease-stained jumpsuit has nothing in the bank. They see the dirt under my fingernails and assume my mind is just as dull. But the secret to my success was simple. I knew how to fix things that others were too proud to touch. Over 40 years, my small repair shop turned into a fleet, and my investments in industrial real estate had quietly grown into a multi-million-dollar empire. I didn't need a Ferrari to feel powerful. I felt powerful, knowing I could buy the whole dealership in cash if I wanted to. While Samantha was busy trying to hide her low-class father, I was sitting in my modest office, looking at the Puller family's financial records. It was a disaster. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed money. They spent millions on galas and private jets, while their core business was suffocating under bad management and massive debt. They were the ultimate, quote, 7, fierce on the outside, but ready to tear at the first sign of rain. I kept my wealth a secret from Samantha, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted her to value people for who they were, not what they had. Clearly, I had failed. She saw my old pickup truck and felt shame. She saw my calloused hands and felt disgust. One afternoon, I stopped by her place to bring her a birthday gift, a vintage locket that belonged to my mother. She didn't even open the box. She pushed me into the hallway because Julian's business partners were over for drinks. She hissed, her voice trembling with embarrassment. She closed the door in my face. I stood there in the hallway of that cold, expensive mansion, holding my mother's locket. It was then I realized that the daughter I raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who valued a lie more than her own blood. 6 months passed before the phone finally rang. It wasn't a call to check on my health or to invite me for dinner. It was Samantha, and her voice was frantic. She didn't even say hello. She just started talking about a temporary liquidity issue at Julian's firm. They needed $500,000 by the end of the week, or the bank was going to start seizing assets. They were desperate, and apparently, I was the only person left who hadn't already turned them down. Quote 11, she asked, her tone shifting into that manipulative, sweet voice she used as a child. I sat in my garage, looking at my scarred knuckles, and felt a cold bitterness rise in my chest. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a payout. But the real sting came next. "There's just one thing, Dad," she whispered. "The Pullers. They can't know it's from you. Julian's father would be humiliated if he knew a mechanic saved his legacy. We'll tell them it's from an anonymous offshore investor. You just provide the check, stay in the shadows, and let us handle the rest. Your look, it just doesn't fit the image we're trying to project right now." I sat in silence for a long minute. She wanted my sweat and my life's work, but she didn't want my name. She wanted the, quote, 15 money, but not the, quote, 16 father. I could hear Julian in the background, barking orders at someone, sounding every bit the entitled prince, despite being broke. I said quietly. She hung up without a goodbye. She didn't realize that by asking for that money, she had just handed me the keys to her golden cage. That evening, I decided to go to Samantha's house unannounced. I wanted to see if there was any shred of the daughter I used to know left in her. I used the spare key she'd forgotten I had and walked in through the side door. I was standing in the kitchen, about to call out her name, when I heard voices coming from the sunroom. It was Samantha and her mother-in-law, Eleanor. They were clinking glasses, likely celebrating the fact that they thought they had found a way out of their financial hole. I stayed in the shadows, my heart heavy. "Are you sure your relative will come through with the funds?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's so dreadfully middle-class to rely on someone like that, but I suppose desperate times call for desperate measures." Samantha laughed, and it was a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Don't worry, Eleanor. He's obsessed with providing. He's lived his whole life like a dog, saving every penny from those disgusting repair jobs. He's got no one else to give it to. He'll hand over the check because he thinks I actually care." "And after the business is stable?" Eleanor pressed. "Then we won't have to deal with him anymore," Samantha replied casually. "Honestly, once he passes away, we'll just sell that hideous workshop and those scrapyards. We can use the inheritance to finally buy that villa in Tuscany we talked about. Until then, I'll just keep him on a leash. He's useful, but let's be real. His presence is a stain on our social standing. I stood there in the dark, my hands shaking, not out of sadness, but out of a cold, clarifying rage. I wasn't a father to her. I was a retirement plan. I was a, quote, 25, to be bleached away once my bank account was drained. I quietly backed out of the house, drove home, and called my lawyer. I told him I wanted to make the loan, but I wanted it wrapped in a contract so tight it would act as a noose. The next morning, I called Samantha. I kept my voice flat, professional, and tired, playing the role of the simple father she thought I was. I told her I had the money ready. She squealed with delight over the phone, but I knew it wasn't love. It was the sound of a predator seeing its prey walk into the trap. "Thank you, Dad. You're a lifesaver," she said, though I knew she meant money saver. I met her and Julian at a small, quiet coffee shop, far away from their usual high society hangouts. They didn't want to be seen with me. I arrived in my work shirt, smelling of diesel and sweat, just to see them flinch. Julian looked at me with a mixture of pity and greed. He pushed a thick stack of papers toward me, but I shook my head. I said, sliding a folder across the table. Julian smirked, glancing at the documents. He saw the, quote, 30 clause I had included, the one Samantha insisted on, and his eyes lit up. He thought I was being humble. He didn't bother reading the fine print in the back sections regarding collateral and asset forfeiture. He didn't see that the loan wasn't just backed by the $500,000, but by the Puller family estate and their remaining shares in the investment firm. "It looks fine, Frank," Julian said, barely containing his laughter as he signed the papers. "You really don't have to worry about the technical stuff. We've got this handled. You're just the silent partner." "Exactly," I replied. "Silent." They grabbed the folder and left without buying me a coffee. They were so convinced I was an uneducated, blue-collar worker that they didn't think I could afford a lawyer who charged $500 an hour. They thought they had tricked the old man. As I watched them walk to their expensive car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't losing a daughter. I was gaining an empire. The clock was officially ticking on their borrowed lifestyle. The months that followed were a masterclass in arrogance. With my $500,000 in their accounts, the Pullers didn't change their ways. They doubled down. Instead of fixing the structural issues in their firm, Julian bought a brand new Italian sports car, and Samantha started posting photos from a, quote, 36 vacation in Saint-Tropez. They thought the, quote, 37 was a bottomless pit of cash that had bought them a second life. They had no idea they were just decorating a house that no longer belonged to them. I went back to my workshop, working 10-hour shifts, quietly monitoring their downfall through my legal team. Every few weeks, I get a report. The Pullers were missing their quarterly targets. Their, quote, 38 investments were failing because they were based on ego rather than market reality. Julian was a gambler, not a businessman. He was using the loan to pay off other debts, creating a mountain of interest that was about to collapse. Samantha stopped calling me altogether. She didn't even send a text for Father's Day. I later found out through a mutual acquaintance that she had told people I had moved away to a retirement community, and that she was managing my affairs. She was literally erasing me from existence while living off my blood and sweat. She was so sure I was too stupid to understand the legal deadlines in the contract she had signed. The deadline for the first major repayment arrived and passed in silence. No wire transfer, no phone call, not even an apology. My lawyer called me that afternoon. "Frank, they've defaulted. Technically,
You own the majority stake in the firm and the deed to the estate as of midnight. What's the next move?" I looked at my hands, greasy, tired, and strong. I felt a strange sense of calm. "They're hosting a massive charity gala tonight, aren't they?" I asked. "Yes, a Save the Children fundraiser. Very high profile," my lawyer replied. "Good," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "I think it's time the silent partner finally spoke up. Get the paperwork ready. I'm going to a party." The charity gala was being held at the Puller estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and security guards in suits. The driveway was a parade of luxury cars, Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces, and Porsches. Everyone was dressed in black tie attire, sipping champagne that cost more than a month of my mortgage. They were all there to celebrate philanthropy, while the hosts were secretly penniless, living on a debt they had no intention of paying back. I didn't rent a tuxedo. I didn't even wash the grease off my face. I finished my shift at the shop, hopped into my 2012 Ford F-150 with the rusted wheel wells, and drove straight to the front gates. The security guard tried to stop me, waving his flashlight with a look of pure disgust. "Deliveries are around the back, pal. This is a private event," he barked. I didn't argue. I simply handed him a legal injunction and a copy of the deed. His eyes widened as he read the first few lines. He looked at the truck, then back at the paper, and slowly stepped aside to open the gate. I rumbled up the long driveway, the loud engine of my truck drowning out the soft classical music playing from the speakers. I parked right on the front lawn, the tires digging into the perfect grass. I stepped out of the truck. My work boots crunched on the gravel. I could see the guests through the massive glass windows, their faces pressed against the panes, pointing and whispering at the quote, 48 on the lawn. I saw Samantha standing near the entrance, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. She rushed out, her silk dress fluttering in the wind, Julian trailing behind her like a lost puppy. She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest. I looked them both in the eye and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "I'm not here as your father, Samantha," I said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "And I'm not here for a check, Julian. I'm here for my house." The silence that followed was deafening. Samantha looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole, while Julian's face turned a ghostly white. Guests began spilling out onto the terrace, champagne glasses in hand, watching the drama unfold. Eleanor Puller marched toward us, her jewelry clinking like a warning bell. "Julian, who is this man? Why is he trashing our lawn with that vehicle?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at my truck. I didn't wait for Julian to stumble through a lie. I pulled the notarized foreclosure papers and the majority share certificates from my pocket. I said, my voice projecting across the crowd. Samantha grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She yelled, but the desperation in her eyes told a different story. I laughed, looking at the crowd. The crowd gasped. The Samantha Puller was being unmasked in front of the very people she worshipped. I turned to Julian. I looked at Eleanor, who was clutching her chest in genuine shock. Samantha fell to her knees, sobbing, finally realizing that the father she was so ashamed of was the only thing that had been keeping her world from falling apart. I didn't feel pity. I felt the weight of 40 years of sacrifice finally being settled. I stood there, a blue-collar man in a sea of silk and diamonds, and for the first time in years, I breathed easy. The aftermath was swift and cold. I didn't stay to watch them scramble for their designer suitcases. I didn't need to see the look on Julian's face when his sports car was towed, or the way Eleanor had to call a cab because she no longer had a driver. I simply got back into my truck and drove home to my modest house. I didn't want their mansion. I sold the estate and the firm within a month. I kept the money I had earned through the years and used the profits from the sale to set up a massive scholarship fund for kids from trade schools. Kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty to build a real future. As for Samantha, she tried to call me dozens of times. She sent long emails apologizing, claiming she was confused and pressured by the pullers. But I knew better. I offered her one thing: a job. I told her she could work as a junior clerk in my new equipment office, starting at the bottom, earning a modest wage, and learning the value of $1. She refused, of course. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment, working a retail job she hates, finally realizing that the status she craved was as fragile as glass. Today, I'm retired. I spend my mornings in my garden and my afternoons mentoring young mechanics. My hands are still scarred, and I still drive my old truck, but I walk with my head held high. I lost a daughter, but I found my self-respect. I realized that being a father isn't about being a bank, it's about being respected. I gave her everything, but she wanted my soul, and that was a price I wasn't willing to pay. Looking back, I wonder if I was too harsh. But then I remember her laughing about my death, and I know I did what was necessary. So, I have to ask you, do you think I did the right thing? Was my revenge too cruel, or did they get exactly what they deserved? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice and family drama, please hit the like button and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your support helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. The end. Thank you for listening.